are going to take and share. I'm going to ask them a question, and then they're going to share a little bit about their faith. And then also, when they are done doing that, I'm going to ask them to take and share a little bit about why they chose to serve in Virginia. So it'll be just like kind of a discussion. And at the end, then, if there is time for questions, we will let you ask questions of them. So Joel has agreed to go first. So Joel, Lisa, and Harry, here is your question. Share your faith story.
Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Joel Neubauer, and I am joining you from Yorktown, Virginia this evening. It's good to be together. And Pastor Jessica, your story was so warming to my heart, and so relatable. My grandfather was a pastor. My parents were my pastors. I was raised in the church. I was in my mother's womb when she preached on a Sunday, and then she gave birth the next day on Martin Luther's 497th birthday. Um, it has been the story of my life to run around sanctuaries and live in church nurseries and do my
Called
homework
from the
and
womb, right, Joel?
called for right from the womb, um, and in the most joyful way. I never remember a time in my life where I was not welcomed and loved in worship. I was allowed to be one of those children who could run around and explore. I remember the Sanctuary of Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Gaithersburg, Maryland. Kate Costa, who many of us knew as a pastor, ended up serving there sometime after I was a kid. But they left the microphones on all the time. And when the church left, Jessica, that's when the pastor's kids got to go up and just rock it in the microphones in the mid 80s, our love for God. Um, it would be very easy for me to say, I've never had a crisis of faith. I have felt the presence of God and the big mysteries of Trinity have never bothered me at all. God has been that love that is overarching and huge and very specific in my pilgrim walk with Jesus. Christ has come to me in dreams and visions that melt me to tears to reflect on today. As a teen, when I walked with Christ in a direction of a beautiful heavenly picture and asked to stop and go get my friends, and Christ turned and said, "Don't you know they're all cared for? I came for you." So that here I am peace hits me today from a faith that has never been difficult. And that's special to me because I think a strong Christian faith works best for people who are really crumpled. When I meet people who are doing well in life, I realize they often don't need to lean on a crutch. I need a crutch. I have a much harder time living with myself, understanding myself, being gracious with myself, than I do putting any of that in the hands of a God who has always been presented to me as love. And so my faith has grown in life as love and mercy have been spoken to me. Um, hymns, hymns that I really love are like "Chief of Sinners though I be," and "'Twas I, Lord Jesus, I it was denied thee, I crucified thee." I know what a rotten human I am. And because of that, the consistent presence of grace has has woken me up in the morning. You know, Christ takes my hand out of bed. The Holy Spirit leads me through my day. When, as an adult, my family split up and it didn't matter, I was in my 40s, I still thought I had ruined my parents' marriage and everything was my fault. Our Father in heaven was able to stand by and still say, "Kid, the family's together. People are people, and we try our best, but I have you." Learning that mercy for myself has made it impossible for me to stand in judgment against the world. And I've been grateful to be called into a church tradition where my faith, the faith that we share, the faith I hear from you, allows me to look at the world around me and not see people who need to be saved as if Christ were a failure in being our savior, but a world that has been made safe in the promised love of Christ, where I'm allowed to go and proclaim good news about a reality rather than the threat of a God who's going to get us if we don't act right and save ourselves with the one required work of faithing just enough to be worth it. So that's my faith. That's how I was raised in a church that allowed me to know love, so that when I turn and I see the world around me, I'm not speaking in theory. I'm speaking from lived experience about what that love has been to me and what I have to trust that love is for those around me. That being said, as easy as faith has been, church ain't always been so easy. Being a PK, I didn't have any rose-colored glasses. I knew how long council meetings can go. I knew about a contentious congregational meeting. I knew what happens when the leading pillars of the congregation can hold up the roof but knock each other down. I had always felt called to live in the church, but as a young adult, I saw how real the people in the church were. And it took me some time and some study and proving to myself that I could get degrees in science and go in those routes. I could study counseling and open up doors. What I couldn't do was face the reality of the world or the realities of people without Christ. And that's where the faith that I had been taught was forced to look at the church and say, I can't, right? Pastor Jessica, lift it up. The pulpit can feel originally like a refuge. I imagine for many of us, our early experience of the church is a mighty fortress that keeps us safe until we realize the saints inside with us are just as scary as the people outside. God led me through that, knowing myself and loving my neighbors who were far away, to realize how I could also be loved and love the people we are when we're pulled together and realize that Jesus doesn't free us from being human, but leads us in being human. I'm going to cut myself off to hear from Deacon Lisa.
Lisa, your turn.
I was telling my Alexa device to be quiet. Sorry, Joel. I wasn't trying to cut you off, but I am happy to go if you are done. You done, Joel? Yeah, okay. So I'm Lisa Geiger. I'm a deacon in our synod here, and I'm in Virginia Beach. I am a newly retired deacon as of January 1st. So I think what I wanted to share this evening, because so many of our folks in the Virginia Synod in particular, I think we hear a lot of times about people who grew up in and I grew up in the church. I'm a cradle Lutheran, but I did not participate in youth events. I didn't go to camp. I didn't do any of that stuff. So really my deeper connection to my faith and trying to understand what that meant in my life and meant to respond to God's call came late college, after college. And I really kind of pinpoint when we had our first intern at Emmanuel, was probably the first time I really started listening. He suggested that I go to the Acts program in the Virginia Synod or explore classes at a college and lots of things. And so my interest peaked and I started doing a number of things and was always connected to the church. That led me to a bachelor's in religion and a master's in theology, just because I thought it was interesting, not really knowing where that was going to lead me. And then in 2009, I went to the vocations conference. At the time, there were associates in ministry and deaconesses and the other category. I can't remember what it was before it all became deacons. But it wasn't a fit So I went home and just went back to what I was doing. I worked for 26 years as a government contractor. I worked for Honeywell as a senior project manager at Navy headquarters, and again, was always involved in adult Bible studies, Power in the Spirit, the Acts program, a number of things. And I would say it wasn't until much later, there was a guy I used to work with. He would come over and he would always stop to chat. And he would always ask me this question. He said, "What do you do? What do you want to do with your life when you grow up?" And I would always respond to him, "I'm not sure, but I think I'd like to work for the church." Whatever that meant. I had no specific idea. And then in 2015, for a variety of reasons, with the contract changing and all, I left what I'd known for 26 years and took a leap of faith. And about 6 months later, I ended up going to First Lutheran Church as their office operations manager. And I hadn't been there more than 2 or 3 months before Pastor Garris said, "Let's have a conversation about you going back into candidacy, because I think you have some gifts that the church could use." And the rest, as I say now, is history. So at the ripe old age of 50, almost 51, I went back to candidacy, and they said, "Yes, this time we think this is a good fit, and we see the call." And I went through the process and became a deacon, and I was ordained in 2018. And then in 2019, I took a call in a parish. I went to St. Michael in Virginia Beach and was there for 5 years. And then I went to Virginia Wesleyan. But I think what's been most impressed upon me about my faith and my call and my faith journey is that what I always say the story of Scripture tells us, it's about God's relentless pursuit of us. And sometimes that call may not always be obvious, or it may not be immediate. But God is persistent, and if we are willing to really listen, God finds ways to call all of us. For me, it took a long time to get to a particular type of call by being a deacon with what I call a strange set of gifts. My specialization as a deacon is church administration. So it's a lot of things that may initially not sound like God calling you or calling me, but he certainly did. And it's been a wonderful journey, and I'm excited now to see what life as a retired deacon, what God is calling me to do in this chapter of my journey, where I have more free time and ability to do a variety of things. But for me, it was people along the way always encouraging me and inviting me to things and trying to respond to that, which ultimately made me realize what I was doing was working my way to responding to God in a particular way. So that's my faith story and my call story.
Okay, Harry, your turn.
When I first got the question, I wrote some things down. I had a Pentecostal sailor ask me, when did I get the call? And having conversations with him, I remember that he was looking for me to say, I heard the voice like in the temple, and it said, "Go and preach Christ." And I surprised him by explaining I didn't get the call. My grandmother did. I got my acceptance letter at California Lutheran College. My grandmother lived 4 blocks away. I took it over and showed it to her. And she said, "So what are you going to study?" And I said, "Grandma, I don't know." And she said, "Well, your mama says it's a religious school. Religion's probably their best subject. So you study religion." Now, I was a religion major, but I found that my call came as I experienced and was able to apply the different experiences I had in my major. And also because of an illness, my sophomore year, I became a volunteer. I volunteered at a hotline for suicide prevention. I volunteered at a state mental hospital befriending children who were patients. I later was a social worker during an interim in downtown Los Angeles to retired persons. And each experience I had just kind of was part of my discernment, but it was also my confirmation saying, this is what I've called you to do. As my grandmother always told me, you always want to help people, but I wasn't sure how to help them. And this different experiences came back and helped me understand that. And interesting, I'm not a cradle Lutheran. I was Methodist. I became Lutheran my junior year in college at California Lutheran. And then back on campus, after being a social worker, I belonged to a charismatic folk singing group. And singing about the Lord and sharing the different Lutheran congregations was also a confirmation of where I was going. Because we didn't just sing, we would always share why we're singing and what the song's all about. After graduating, I was accepted. I didn't have a candidacy program. Back in and I'm going to date myself, back in the 70s, you chose and you go. And being Methodist and being confirmed as a Lutheran, I could pick any seminary, ALC, LCA, Missouri Synod, but I got to know a professor from Wartburg and decided to go to Wartburg because they felt like a family. I had no idea when I got there. I was the first African American to go to the school in 119 years. But I never felt different. I felt like I was a student. During my interim year, my first year in seminary, I had to do my CPE. I did it at a naval hospital in Long Beach, California, where I'm from. And from that, I was recruited to be a Navy candidate chaplain in the reserves. And after graduating from seminary, I served a parish for 3 years and was recalled to active duty and spent the next 31 years on active duty as a Navy chaplain. And each time I've seen how different experiences has confirmed my call. When I first came into the thought about ministry, I was terrified of dealing with dead people. As a Navy chaplain, I've had people literally die in my arms because of what happened to them. I mean, you don't plan on it. You know, someone gets. I had a young man who, he literally still had the sewage. He had fell into a sewage tank, but I see that as confirmation of who I am and what I'm supposed to be about. So throughout my experiences, and if someone said, did you learn to be a pastor? No, I experienced being a pastor, and that became my call and my discernment to say, this is where you belong. I mean, if you'd have told me that I would cut down a young man who committed suicide and then care for his family, I'd have said, no, I did. So, that's it. And I'll go from there. The next question of why I wound up in Virginia. My last duty assignment, active duty assignment, was division chaplain in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And when you retire from the Navy in the Lutheran Church, you send your profile to the National Church Body, and you're open to any Senate. And Bishop Monty, who I now found out hunts for chaplains, said, I got one. Boom. And I wound up in Virginia Beach at Our Savior's Lutheran Church. And that's how I got to Virginia. And I am, like Lisa, I am currently retired for the second time because I am, and I'm going to date myself, 73 years old. And that's right. But I still serve. I'm the dean of Tidewater. I'm on the trustees of Roanoke College. I'm a member of the Federal Chaplain Scholarship Task Group for the ELCA, and I also serve on the Senate Council. But otherwise, I'm retired.
Well, that's quite a bit keeping you busy, Harry. All right, Joel, your turn. Why did you choose Virginia? I know you're not from here.
I'm not from far away. I hail from, just a couple miles across the Potomac in Maryland. Um, I did go to college in Virginia, but then I went to Gettysburg for seminary, like my parents and grandfather and everybody in my life. Um, and I just I liked the snow. I don't anymore. I'm really glad it didn't happen now. But then I liked the snow. Um, and I went while I was at seminary in Gettysburg. I went and studied in Munich for a year. I did my internship in Kansas. I took my first call in New England. I really thought the church was spiraling around the world and toward the north. Except, like I said, I had gone to school in Virginia, and that meant that I met somebody from Virginia. So while I was in college, there's this great Baptist kid, Danielle, who at that time was having a crisis of denomination because she had been raised in a Baptist congregation in Hampton, Virginia, that taught her the love of Jesus. And the SBC at the time was having trouble with the broadest love of Jesus. And Danielle had a roommate who had grown up at Gloria Dei Lutheran in Hampton. And her roommate said, "Why don't you come to church with me? The Jesus you're looking for sounds like the Jesus we know." And so she brought her roommate to church, and there in the pews at St. Stephen in Williamsburg, I met my best friend who 10 years later I married. And goodbye, New England. Hello, Virginia. That was on leave of call, though. And I'll take the moment just to say, when I met Bishop Mauney, he informed me that it would be 3 years before a full-time call would be open to sustain somebody where I was located in Virginia. And he wasn't lying. It took me 3 years. And just a tiny plug, the demographic of a young white married man with a child taking 3 years means finding sustainable calls for demographics that are less expected by congregations can be vastly longer. So there's coming to Virginia opened my eyes to some equity issues and to immense privilege issues in my life. So coming to Virginia was completely by accident, but very much for God to teach me a lot of important things.
Okay, Lisa?
This is an easy question for me, but before I answer that, like Harry, I still continue to serve the bishop's office as the candidacy process administrator. So I'm retired, but still doing things. I'm in Virginia because I was born here, born and raised here. I'm a native. I was born in Norfolk. And other than moving when I was 1.5 and 5, which I really don't remember, I went to all my schools here. And at the time I put my paperwork in to look for a call, my father was in memory care and my mother had died. So I was the primary caretaker and restricted myself to this area. But Virginia is home to me and happy to be in the synod. So
Can I jump in? Because I just saw Christine Rowe is here in this room. God love you, Native Virginia people. When I was on my way back to Virginia, I was also taking classes at the seminary, and I met somebody in the computer lab when I couldn't figure out how to print my homework, who was asking me where I was from, and I said, "Well, I live in Connecticut, but I'm on my way to Virginia. I don't know anything about it. I hope life will work there." This great student, Christine Rowe, was like, "Oh, you'll love Virginia. It is the best place. My congregation has been so great." I ended up at the congregation she came from. So God bless Christine.
Okay, that pretty much kind of summarizes what we were going to cover in this. So does anybody have any questions for Lisa, Joel, or Harry at this time? We've got about 10 minutes, or is there something that you would like to share about your faith story?
May I ask a question to Joel?
Go ahead, Christine.
The question I was wondering, Joel, I think you mentioned that about your experience with dreams and that place. And I was wondering if you could recall like a person or an incident or a pastor, whoever that might have been, that encouraged you, like when you first shared that with somebody and what you experienced. Where did that come from? Who was the encourager behind you? Not the naysayer, not the shame builder, not the, guilt person, but the person who's like, oh, and really listen to you talk about your dreams and opening that up. I was just curious about that.
So it was hard for me to, having a mother and a father for a pastor meant that I never really had just a mother and a father or a pastor. So I didn't have anybody. That, in the particular dream I had, I shared the facts. Jesus walked with me and told me he was coming for me. And it was something I needed to hear. What I would honestly say is I didn't have anybody I knew to go to at that time. And that's a good thing. I was so close to everybody in the church that I didn't have anybody where there was kind of enough distance to trust that I could be really vulnerable as a kid. I was 16 at the time. So that's more one that I've had to carry with me and slowly eke out to people along the way. So I would say campus ministry was huge there. Pastor Larry Schoberg had been one of the pastors at St. Stephen, and then Pastor Ballantyne came in. I had people who walked with me as I grew so I could unpack kind of my childlike faith at times when I did have the safety to explore. And kind of, I heard that from you, Lisa, like what it is to have early experiences that are huge, but it takes a while to meet the right person.
Thank you, Joel.
Anybody else have a question or would like to take and share?
I did forget to say, maybe this is why it took me so long. I used to have along the way, I had a lot of people say, oh, are you going to school to be a pastor? And I said, no. It was always abundantly clear to me that my call was not to be a pastor. So maybe that's why it took me a little while to figure out how to live into that call. And then the deacon call was a perfect fit. Even now, I still have people ask me, like, there's still a lot of confusion about the call of deacons being ordained ministers. I'll have even recently had people ask me if I was going to like go back and finish so I could become a pastor. And I'm like, well, no, I've already finished and I'm a deacon. So it's an interesting journey, and I feel that that's also part of my call, at least in this Synod, is to help folks understand the role of deacons. But I always knew I was not called to be a pastor. So
I was really surprised to hear how many stories today involved going through the sanctuary singing and what our faith means in song, whether that's by ourselves or pulled together. And I'm curious, has that resonated with other people? I saw that in comments and I've heard that in stories. I go sing to Jesus in the sanctuary. I think it's one of our great gifts. And I wonder how we open that for other people, if that is something special.
Well, mine isn't so much singing as it is, as you folks know, I write poetry. And that is my expression of being able to take and share what I'm feeling and how the Spirit moves in my life. I was raised in the church. I wasn't raised Lutheran. I was Methodist again. And it's been a wonderful journey. I think we've got a few minutes here. I'll just take and share a little bit about my faith story. I had perfect attendance up through senior high school. Parents took me to church. I want to say, the odd one in my family. because I was the only one in that really wanted to attend church. I was raised in the 70s during the Jesus movement and all that kind of stuff. During, let's see, it would have been in 1979, the church was having a missionary conference and they were having a 24-hour prayer vigil. So I signed up for a time. I lived about 5 minutes away from the church. You could stay at home or you could go to the church. So I went down to the church and spent my hour down there. And during that time, I prayed, Lord, use me where you would have me be, whether it is serving you or being with someone in that I could love for the rest of my life. Well, a year later, I met Bill, and we spent 39 years together. But during that time, and that I served within the church in that. But then I realized, probably sometime last summer, that the second part now of that prayer that I prayed, for him to use me where he would use me, is now occurring. With me serving with power in the Spirit, going through the lay preaching academy and becoming a lay minister and serving within my church. And I can also say, Joel, thank you for the time that you spent at St. Andrew. You were an inspiration to me during that time. Jessica, in your time that I've known you, you have been an inspiration to me. And so I just want to thank everybody. Bishop Milton was on here. I'm not sure if she's still here or not, but also I got to know Bishop through the women's organization and her statement to step out in boldness. And that has been my journey. So it's time to go back to our main room for time for worship. We'll see you there.